So thanks for coming. Again, this is the Gasparilla Interactive Festival 2015. This is our panel on artificial intelligence as a job destroyer and creator. And I want to welcome Dr. Stephanie Tripp from the University of Tampa is going to be our moderator. And since we've got some new faces up here, this is not our original lineup of speakers. We've got a great lineup of speakers. So I'm going to let everybody take a moment and do a quick introduction of themselves.
That's good.
Go ahead.
Yes. Paul, why don't we start with you?
Sure. My name is Paul Hillier. I'm also an associate professor of communication at the University of Tampa. I'm thinking back of an old professor I had that said, never begin any talk with, any kind of confession or embarrassment. But I will tell you, I don't think a whole lot about artificial intelligence, but I have spent a good deal of time thinking about technology and media, and particularly from the angle of the philosophy of communication.
So my name is Bobby Wolf. I bring a slightly different perspective from a couple of folks on the panel here in regards to how the market is going to address and invest in artificial intelligence, and what does that actually mean when you peel back the onion on the technology and how that's received in the opportunity and the market opportunity that's out there.
Briefly, I'm a digital media scholar and artist, and I study the history of information technology and its effects on culture, and in particular, I'm interested in community identity and knowledge legitimation, and I'm also interested in how changing communications technologies affect society.
So I'm Marvin Scaff. I've been in Tampa over 20 years. My background is technology, software development. I've actually worked on a fair number of AI-based systems for business applications. I always try to think about ways that you can use technology to gain an unfair advantage in business, and think that as a society, we should be thinking about ways that we can leverage technology to compete in business, not against technology and the machines are going to take over the world and all that. I think it's kind of nonsense.
My name is Vinny Tafiro, major technology fan, published a book on corporate empathy, how technology is affecting how corporations interact with society, and have been studying what artificial intelligence and what the technology that's coming, like driverless cars and so on and so forth, and how they're affecting our lives, and how we're really at a generational change between industrial revolution and our knowledge economy that's coming.
Okay. I thought perhaps, should we start maybe just with a general question about this idea? Of course, right now, I just saw a very interesting TED Talk with Jeremy Howard. Some of you may know him. He's an Australian technologist and developer of deep learning systems. And he remarked in his talk something that may be apparent to just about everyone here, which is this transformation of artificial intelligence and machine learning right now is increasing productivity in ways that even 5 years ago were just unanticipated. Right? So the question becomes, how different might this be, or in disrupting work, not only for what we might consider traditional jobs that are disrupted during recessions, et cetera, but even some highly professional jobs, jobs such as pathologists, or legal scholarship, et cetera. And whether this disruption is different in kind rather than degree, and if it is, what do we see for the future, next 5 years? And how do we deal both with that disruption, but also perhaps what benefits may accrue from those increases in productivity? We want to start, maybe Marvin, are you interested? Vinny, anyone?
I mean, I see technology as a tool. And you have to think about ways that you can leverage it. And because of what's happened with the web and with Google and making information accessible, as a person that needs to make decisions about your day, whether it's your personal life or your business life, how can you accelerate your learning and make the decision-making happen faster? So if you think about a few years ago, it was popular for people to wear the WWJD bracelets, what would Jesus do? So what if you could do what would Steve Jobs do, or what would Jack Welch do, by taking their life experiences and modeling that knowledge, and then be able to just, whether it's wearable computing or audio-based interface, as a human, be able to ask that system or get an advice from it to help you just make a decision faster. So I see it just being a tool to help accelerate learning and like increase decision making. Is the way I would look at it.
Okay. Vinny, thoughts?
Yeah, I think when you look at that accelerated learning, I think a lot of our education system for the last 80 plus years has been focused on how do we produce the same type of cog to fit into an industrial machine, but it's a service industry that came out of that. And so everybody that graduated college needed to have the same skill set to be fit into that machine of the service economy that was built around it. And what I think now is, rather than memorization being important, while we lament the fact that our kids these days don't have to memorize the same things that we do, they're learning how to access information far faster than we did. And we're on a slower learning curve. So I think that speed to access to information is dramatically changed, especially in the last 20 years.
Yeah, and I think there's a massive need for that. And the reason why is the trends that are going on all across the world and all across the technology landscape, with massive increase in data that is available to all of us, and then in particular, certain career fields that focus on analyzing that data. When there's a tidal wave coming at you, you need a way to process and understand and be able to react almost in real time to that information. And so the ability to have smart, deep learning capabilities in machine learning that can help you process that information, that's absolutely needed, because today you might need one person, but tomorrow it's 2 and 5 and 20 or 1,000 to process the same amount of information. And so we're going to have to rely on artificial intelligence going forward in order to help us do that.
Paul, thoughts?
I don't know how else to begin other than to begin at the beginning. And that's, I told you, I focus on the philosophy of communication. And I think I'm personally more interested in the unpacking what artificial intelligence is and what it possibly could be. I feel like before you address any implications of this, you have to unpack these terms. And I don't know what we mean by intelligence, to be honest. They're already intelligent machines, right? My microwave knows how to turn itself off when the popcorn's done. They make cars. I don't own one that can parallel park itself. But perhaps we mean this a bit further, right? We mean something that can learn on its own, maybe even communicate with us. And in that sense, we have that as well already too, right? I mean, we have social media we can write these adaptive, predictive types of programs that can respond to us. But they're always in some limited way. They are limited by human beings that create them. I think we have this fantasy that the technology is going to be able to learn on its own and become this magical force. And that's the other part of this artificial intelligence. The most interesting part to me is the artificial and how we conceptualize and think of artificial. Because it's, I think a distinction's being put forward that doesn't exist. And that we're trying to separate machines and technologies from human beings, when in fact it's an artificial distinction. The machines are always going to be products of human labor. That's what they are. They aren't, I'm sorry, I know that there are some fantastic things out there. I know that there are some extraordinarily mind-bending types of advancements with technologies. There's no doubt about that. But they are always going to be limited by human beings, because that's who created them. Again, I think it's a fantasy and magic thinking that they're going to take lives of their own. I can go on, but that's probably enough.
Well, to your point,
Yeah.
and this may be that distinction, is we're not talking about artificial intuition.
Right.
And this is where that difference is there was the article that you shared with me, Stephanie, on jobs below and above the API.
Yes.
And so when you look at what is artificial intelligence, what did Quicken and different accounting software do to the accounting and bookkeeping industry?
Right.
What is self-checkout doing to the retail industry? And so this idea that you have that API and you have the people that program the API to replace a task that's below the API. But in all of that, none of that is replacing the intuition of a human operator somewhere in that thing, whether it's needed anymore or it gets scaled back. And I think that fantasy, I think, is whether or not we develop human intuition or artificial intuition at some point. We're definitely just on the logical intelligence side of what AI can do, not the human side of it. And I think that's kind of what I gathered out of that, and what my thoughts are on what AI is as artificial intelligence. It's not intuition. It's still just task-oriented, even though it's really complex tasks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yet we look at some of the more advanced work in deep learning, and maybe you can speak to this, Bobby. Some of the discussions you've had with companies doing some of the cutting-edge work in this. That we're beginning to get intelligence or organized intelligence systems that actually can come up with hypotheses, right? And the example I'm thinking of, provided by Jeremy Howard, some of you may be familiar with it, is they set about 1.5 million images of different tumors into a machine doing pattern recognition, visual pattern recognition techniques, and that the system was able to recognize the tumors and actually overcome, human vision in this because of the detailed-oriented computational power, right? Was probably not surprising to those of us who know how far artificial vision has gone. But what surprised people in that instance was that these machine systems actually learned that cells around the tumors were as important or more important in identifying whether the tumor would metastasize or grow than the shape of the tumor itself, which was an insight that was developed in the machine process and not by the pathologist working with it, which was pretty extraordinary. I mean, it stunned me when I heard about it.
And so the next logical step to that, I think, which is really exciting, is when you take, these are one-off pictures that they fed into a machine. Today and going forward, the next question is what happens, how do you do that in real time? How do you send a camera down a vein and you're processing the video in real time, and it's using computer vision and machine learning to actually update the knowledge that you've already got. And one of the things that we all hear about is this driverless car, and I think, when we talk to the Google team that's kind of running this kind of stuff, that the first time you drive a driverless car down the street, I personally would not want to be in it. It's very scary because it doesn't know what's going on. But then the next time it drives, if it drove down this hall, it knows that those pillars are not going to change. And then the next time it figures out that those flags are going to be there, so don't worry, it's not a bird that's going to come down and crash on you. And then by the time it gets, it's consistent and it happens, then it can figure out, hey, this is it pulls up to a stop sign and it knows that there's a dog that's getting ready to cross the street, so then it can react and it can learn. Maybe it's not intuition, but it is rules-based acknowledgement of what has happened in the past and what is happening right now. And for really, from the humanist perspective, I'll leave it to you guys, but that is what, for many, for millennia, is what has differentiated human beings, is that we learn from experience that happened in the past, and we apply that information and knowledge to something that's happening right now to make a decision. And to me, that's why it's so fascinating.
Yeah, and if we can think about this in terms of, I think many of us may have different comfort levels according to whether machines can pass as humans, right? The old Turing test, and what that might mean, right? I think many of us probably that's deeply seated in our belief systems. But the more immediate thing I think that we're talking about here, maybe we wanted to get into, is what does that mean in a practical sense, right? If machines can actually sort tumors, right? What does that mean for pathologists? And I know that part of the seed of this discussion emerged during a class of mine that Vinny was a wonderful discussant in, and was this notion that all of a sudden the kinds of jobs that are being disrupted are professional jobs, creative jobs, and not the sort of jobs that people typically think of as job loss. And these are jobs that already involve high levels of education and training and investment. So this idea of if you get more educated, right, at some level, maybe perhaps even then, you know, so it makes us, it almost offers up the idea of what happens
If you
socially.
think about that today, though,
Right.
like the people who are experts at looking at that type of information as a human, if they're able to have these systems that can help accelerate their decision making, it frees them up to do other things. If you think about like the taxi industry is pissed about Uber now, what are they going to do when they can replace the driver with autonomous vehicles? What happens, you know, to the taxi driver job industry?
Right.
So, you know, as far as those kinds of impacts on society.
Right. And that takes us back to the above and below API, right?
Yeah.
Which came from an article called "The Uberization of what was it, Uberization of America or something?
Of jobs.
Of
what
jobs,
it was.
right?
And that's, you know, to your point with that. And that's what was an eye-opening to me is when I realized, you know, early on you look at, you know, self-checkout and all these things. What I didn't realize was that after the Enron case, that all of the corporate documentation was made available as public information. And so entrepreneurs and innovators started applying APIs to that. And today, you know, what used to take 500 attorneys in corporate discovery now takes one attorney using a software program, and the software is becoming more accurate at discovery in email and text documentation than the attorneys were. So while we have this argument kind of in the media about, well, you know, $15 minimum wage or replace retail workers with self-checkout, you have $100,000 law degree or replace a lawyer with an algorithm. So that continues to happen in places that we didn't discover it. And like I said, it's only in the last, you know, decade that side with professional services is coming along, and it seems to not be stopping.
Right. And I wonder, you know, you had this enormous amount, I don't think anybody doubts, this idea of increased productivity, right, that we're getting. And so maybe a question to ask, number one, is we have tremendous disruption and potential harm to certain parts of the population, enormous potential benefits, right? And this idea of productivity has always been a battle between, you know, the people who are working and displaced or potentially displaced and the people who are investing and owning the equipment and the technology and who benefits, right? That's always been the negotiation, right? Is it more time off? Is it higher wages? Is it more profits? How do we decide where to draw that line? Paul, I know you're from, you know, can talk about the idea of this productivity and perhaps justice, or if you're comfortable with that, or?
I think it's really easy to slip into technological determinist arguments when we're talking about technology and this artificial intelligence, where we want to locate social transformations in the technology itself, right? These things come about, and as a result of this change happens. I mean, the classic example is always like Lewis Mumford's clock, right? Lewis Mumford wrote about the clock and wrote about the emergence of the clock and how it transformed society. I'm pretty critical of that view. It wasn't the clock itself. It was a larger capitalist urge to center around timekeeping. It's not Uber itself. It's this larger social urge to maybe even not interact with each other in certain kinds of ways and to get things more efficiently and done. That's a social process, right? All of these technologies get inserted into existing social relations. Yes. And all of this attention to, these changes will come about. These are all hypothetical. It's misplaced to look in the technology itself. And the appropriate place is to look at how society is ordered.
You know, I actually couldn't agree more. And that comes to kind of this idea of around how do you regulate the future and how do you draw laws up that will define the interaction between things going forward, right? And so, you know, the FCC, you know, they're in a fascinating world where we're able to, this net neutrality that we're able to do, and being able to not confine ourselves, but yet still have a defined path to go forward from a legal structures. It's got to be critical. That's why you've got to think about it today, and you certainly can't wait till tomorrow.
It's similar too with like what the FAA is doing with drones, and you know, the technical problems are being solved, the business problems are being solved, but the regulatory issues are impacting that being able to be adopted. So.
Absolutely, and drones themselves is a hotbed for artificial intelligence and understanding how a drone is going to get from point A to point B, and is a pilot that's near and dear to my heart.
Well, yes, Phil, to what you were saying, with how you socialize, what are you looking at? Is it social or is it technical? And so if we're unpacking, we all understand what creation is and destruction is, I think. We want to unpack those. We unpacked artificial intelligence. Well, what is a job? And I think that's a critical point where we're at right now, is deciding what is actually valuable as a compensatable asset to society. And when you look at things like GDP or an 8-hour productive day, these things are 100-year-old concepts. We couldn't measure carbon emissions 100 years ago, or we didn't even know what they were, what they were doing. There's so many things that were part of our economy today that were invented years ago and don't take into account these other things that we can measure today. So while we're displacing jobs left and right in different places, there's all these things that we're doing in a productive, creative society where we're rebranding ourselves, reinventing ourselves, stealing things and repositioning them and repackaging them, but we're not figuring out how to add value or changing the economic system that actually measures those things to give them value. And I think that's something that to add value and grow the amount of jobs that are available. So like, what is a job is really what the question is then.
Right. And also just what is a living, right? And what sorts of things does one do or perform in what ways to constitute simply having a living? What does that mean? Is your living always going to be associated with your job or your place in society or your role in society? Maybe now would be an interesting kind of time to talk about the Keynes article. I know that you're fond of. Some of you may have seen in social media, it's getting circulated around. You did the specific title, Vinny, but it's an old John Maynard Keynes article talking once again about these increases or changes in productivity and what that means for life and kind of what his vision was in comparing that to where we are now and perhaps thinking about what we could become or what we could be.
It was 1930, and it was the economic possibilities for our grandchildren. And it was at the time after the First World War and right at the beginning of the Great Depression. And it was really looking at, again, technology was replacing jobs and displacing jobs. And what was that going to look like? And what it was technology is changing faster than society can keep up with evaluating how to adapt and really become part of that technology. And so the article looked at it, obviously as work days would be shrinking, which they haven't shrunk since then. And why has that not happened? Obviously technology makes us more productive, but our social structure says, no, you have to be there at 8 o'clock in the morning, you have to be there for 8 hours, and many of us know that we do our jobs in less than 8 hours. So why are we there for that amount of time? And how do you change the social structure to allow that kind of contraction and productivity to happen?
And become an entrepreneur.
Well, and that's definitely what a lot of people are doing.
That's what we should go to the inner city and go be entrepreneurs.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's true. I mean, I think we have to think about how do we deal with harms, right? And also, how do we share benefits? So if our productivity is increasing tremendously, does that all go to people who own the computer systems? Or does that get shared?
Some jobs are better suited to be replaced by machines. Like the roots of the self-driving car, just like the internet, came out of defense research. Right. So in 2005, DARPA funded the Grand Challenge, where you had to be able to build an autonomous vehicle that could drive through the desert. And the reason they did that is because in the Middle East, when we were at war and you needed to have supply refueling, and people would get blown up by IEDs, the drivers, of these trucks that are bringing refueling and supplies out could be replaced by autonomous vehicles. So in some cases, there's dangerous jobs that technology should supplement and replace, I think.
Right. And that
just
makes,
like for you as an Air Force pilot, like what's happened with the drones and like autonomous vehicles,
Absolutely.
and the guys can sit, in South Dakota and fly overseas, the planes, and not risk a pilot's life.
Yeah, absolutely. What do they call it? The 3Ds: dirty, dangerous, and dull. Right?
That's right. That's right.
So that's wonderful, right? We've got machines that are willing to do all of these dirty, dangerous, and dull things that we don't want them to do, and that perhaps frees up those people who are doing those dangerous jobs. And then the question is what happens to the person doing the dangerous job once the job goes? What can we do to handle? And I think there will be a tremendous disruption, and maybe the people who get the new jobs perhaps will be the same people who lose the jobs. But I think it would probably be a bit naive to think in all cases those are the same populations, and that you know, this will. And so I think we do have a pretty big social problem looming, which could also be, as I said, it could be an opportunity for thinking of new ways to think about jobs and work and prosperity. It's interesting in that more and more I'm seeing, you know, for example, Jeremy Howard, the video I talked about with the pathology, this guy's an AI technologist, a deep learning specialist, and he's starting to say, we've got to address these problems. How do we do this? How do we think creatively about those potential things? A couple of answers, oddly enough, going back to Milton Friedman, of all unexpected sources perhaps, is an idea of a guaranteed basic income, right, for some people, or a negative income tax. Other areas along the political spectrum, of course, would think of different solutions to that. But this isn't simply coming from people who are saying we want, you know, a kind of a state solution or a liberal solution. These are coming from people, I think, across the political spectrum who are thinking deeply about these things, right? So, any thoughts on?
But yeah, listen, I think we all think about this a lot and try to figure out the definition of a job and what does it mean to be valuable to society going forward, and thinking about those questions today. And one of the fundamental places that we need to start with is with education. If we don't prepare people to enter an economy where doing the dull things in life or the dangerous things in life are not necessarily valued, and we expect something else to learn how to do that, then we have fundamentally failed the next generation, right? Then we get into these problems of where in the API stack is this value going. If we're educating and people are prepared to enter that economy, then it really goes to everybody. If people are not educated, not prepared to enter what is and do a job that is deemed valuable, where you can earn a life, then we actually will have a lot of social issues, and then ultimately defining what that means. Does that mean everybody deserves an $800 cell phone? In some economies around the world, the answer to that is absolutely not, and people survive with, you know, Xiaomi come out with the $5 cell phone that is pretty amazing, right? And it gets all the job done, and it's run off of a free OS operating system. You know, Android is around the world, but defining a few of those things, I think, are going to be critical.
And Phil, I know you said something about make everybody an entrepreneur, and I think I'd like to hear a little bit more on.
Oh, well, that
on the social side of that, on the social side of that not being reality.
Yes.
That and I don't know if you can talk if that's.
Yeah, I mean, my reaction to that is we are in agreement, and I have long felt that the crisis, one of the major crises we face, is one of jobs, meaningful work, not just work, but meaningful work. And you know, even though I'm in academia, I don't think education's the answer. I think we're looking at social transformations. I mean, I have my own economic political perspective that I'm happy to share. I'm in favor of legitimate living wages and even maximum wages, and I know I'm an outlier. But that's a different issue, I guess.
Well, like I said, I agree with you 100% on that. Just it's the source of where that comes from, and that's because obviously, like if you look at Henry Ford in his own writings, he understood that a majority of his workers in his factories didn't want to be an entrepreneur, didn't want to take the lead, didn't want to be promoted just for the sake of being promoted. They wanted to be in a position that was stable and allowed them to make a living. It's why he paid them $5 a day so they could afford the same products that were coming off their production line. It wasn't because every worker in a Ford factory wanted to own Ford someday. That's just not the reality. We are all driven by different motivations. Some of us just want to go home at the end of the day and spend time with our family. Some of us are driven by a passion to create things and to lead. And I think that was something Ford knew 100 years ago, and last year with Howard Schultz with Starbucks, with his college achievement plan. If you're a Starbucks barista, you can have college paid for buy Starbucks, and when you finish your degree, you can quit Starbucks, and you don't owe them $1. And you can get your degree in whatever it is, because like Ford 100 years ago, Schultz and Starbucks is looking at how do we rebuild a middle class, and by rebuilding a middle class is by providing an education or the option for an education for our employees and our team, so that eventually they can come back and afford the Starbucks coffee that they're serving right now. And I think that's a change when you look at a livable wage or these bonuses, but they're coming from the corporate sector as opposed to being distributed by government.
And I think another thing we should probably also consider, though, if we consider the Ford economy, we were living at a time when we were still very much in a mode of physical growth, right? We were a manufacturing economy. We had a tremendous amount of growth, and we had a tremendous sense, at least. Of course, now looking back on it, we can see the limitations of this optimism, but we thought we have bountiful resources. Look at the giant country we live in. Look, you know, mountains majesty, and oil is cheap, right? And I don't think we can even talk about this without that specter of sustainability coming up, right? So no longer can we go out and say we've got all these resources and continue to grow. We have to think about the way our economy grows. And when we have limited resources, that also brings up ideas of how do we live in a sustainable economy, and how do we do that justly, right? How do we take care of those who perhaps would love to have an education but won't have that opportunity, or perhaps are older, right, and beyond that point in their lives, right? I think we all can imagine scenarios in which certain people—
Technology can democratize learning, though.
Okay, well, maybe you could tell us more about that.
There's a project in San Francisco called Alt School, and it was one of the Google founders who had a kid and started looking around where they should send their kid to school, and he wasn't happy with what he found in public schools or private schools, and being a Google engineer, he's like, how can I use technology to improve education? So being able to do like adaptive learning and personalized learning based on where the kid is at on the cognitive development scale, and help them learn faster. And with putting an iPad, and my 4-year-old daughter, she's learning to read because of that. My 5-year-old plays Minecraft, and he's learned a lot about technology. It just accelerates the learning as a tool, and because of the web and resources that are available, they can learn so much faster.
And I think for individuals, that's a great thing, right? That individuals should get educated, and that's a wonderful thing. And will we have a society, though, and I guess that's the question, where if everyone's educated, and that would be obviously a wonderful thing, certainly good for culture and art and learning, will our society, with all of these educated people, sustain enough jobs, right, in the same way that we think about jobs now, for people to make a living? I mean, if pathologists are being displaced or attorneys are being displaced, then maybe education isn't always the answer. I agree very much with Paul, and I'm an educator, and I think that there are lots of wonderful reasons to have education, and some of them involve training for jobs. But these days, I'm not sure if a good education necessarily guarantees a job in this economy. Even very well-educated people, I see my students all the time, they're wonderful people, they're deserving people, and some of them are struggling. So to tell them that you're not educated enough is not really fair, right, in some cases. So I wonder, and yet at the same time, is their education valuable? Certainly. It's a great thing. So I'm wondering about that too. I think education is important, and certainly individuals should strive for education to improve their ability to earn a living and be fulfilled. Will that solve all of the problems posed by our current milieu? I'm a little skeptical. What do the rest of you think?
We're jumping around. I love it. We're going from artificial intelligence.
I think we're going to close on this one. So if you want to go around and everybody
I do what I do, and that's to unpack terms and concepts.
Yes.
And I don't even know what education means, or educated. I think that's such a value-laden concept itself. My cliched, stupid little example I often like to use is, the person that's educated in Manhattan who's, wealthy, is able to understand the stock market, has all these attributes that we would locate as educated, right? If this dumb, cliched, unreal example, we take them to Arkansas out in the woods, right, and they don't know anything about self-survival, the person we label as a hick comes along and says, you know, this is how you do it, who's educated then, right? So context plays such a crucial role in what we consider to be, it's a value judgment. It's always, these are the things we value. You know, my kid can read. Okay, all right, yeah, that's nice, it's good, it's helpful, but that I have conflicting feelings about labeling these things as more desirable than another, because they're so contextual.
You know, just the idea of education and kind of where that pushes forward, and maybe we don't want to belabor the point, because maybe defining education and what's well educated at the point is not necessarily the end all. I think the end all is being able to provide value, and at the time that value is valued by society, and you can actually earn that living wage, or excel beyond it, and that's part of why we love being here in this country. But you know, artificial intelligence, the ability for computers to accelerate our ability to gain insight and actually act and react to what's going on around us provides a massive advantage in our generation and the generations to come versus those who've passed, I think.
Yeah, truly. I mean, it's an amazing time, right, in some sense of the word, right, or in many senses of the word. We're having machines, intelligent systems do things that we didn't even think that they could do. Even people who are working in that field didn't think they were going to do 5 years from now. People are still doubting the driving car. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I'm not an expert. Maybe Marvin can tell us about whether you think the driving car will happen, the self-driving car, and when and under what conditions that could happen. But overall, I think we're kind of at a precedence, you know, here where we have extraordinary opportunities with these technologies, but also a lot of challenges that we probably need to consider right now. We do need to consider right now. Benny, why don't you?
Yeah, I think the definition of education is huge, and the fact that I think when you look at our structure of college education, there was a social contract after World War II with the GI Bill. Didn't matter how many people went to college and got a degree in English and Eastern philosophy, and they never used it afterwards. But because the economy was growing or the GI Bill paid for that education, it didn't matter. But today, we're asking an 18-year-old, you better pick a degree that you can make money on in 4 years, when us in the professional field don't know what we're going to be making money doing in 4 years. How's an 18-year-old going to answer that question? And an 18-year-old has never answered that question. And I think that social contract with the college education specifically, because that's the one that costs money that way, whereas that hick in the woods, or that more, you know, there's different things that you learn just organically, but this structured education, the social contract that we have with our youth has been completely pulled out from underneath them. And we're expecting them to solve a problem we created, and we don't know how to solve ourselves.
Oh, okay. Does anybody have?
Sorry.
I have a couple of things just to like pile on to that. So
Yeah.
you talked about Henry Ford and then like, you know, iconic founders. So Steve Jobs about the personal computer talked about it being a bicycle for the mind. And you know, to earn a living, I sit in front of a computer like probably a lot of people in here every day. I would rather be out hiking in nature or playing with my kids. And if you think about like APIs and above and below the API, I mean, today it would be possible for somebody that with reasonable programming skills to build a piece of software that could use Twitter's APIs to go and look at sentiment for companies, and then go use trading platforms APIs and trade stocks. And I could be out riding my bike or playing with my kids, and my software, my intelligent agent or whatever, is looking at what's going on with Twitter sentiment and buying and selling stocks. And I just check my balance, you know, every few days to make sure that my algorithm's working right. And I'm freed up as a human not to have to be chained to my desk and go out and have fun and play with my kids and do something meaningful. So I mean, that's how I see AI like helping humanity.
Yeah.
I think on that we're
Okay. Sounds good.
at time. Thank you,
Questions?
everybody.
Take
Hope you enjoyed.
questions. Do we need questions? Or do we need questions? Okay.